From space, it looks like a smudge on the coast, but zoom in and satellite imagery shows thick black smoke curling into the sky. These are fuel tanks burning just outside Port Sudan. The strikes were carried out by kamikaze drones targeting the airport, oil depots, and military bases. Until now, Port Sudan had been untouched by the civil war tearing the rest of the country apart. It hosts the official government and foreign embassies and serves as Sudan's only real link to international trade and humanitarian aid. Its neutrality was strategic, but now that safe zone has collapsed. No group claimed responsibility, but evidence points to the Rapid Support Forces, which is believed to be armed and financed by the UAE. The drones employed in the attack match Chinese-made models previously spotted in RSF-held areas and are suspected to have arrived through Chad. The attack on Port Sudan wasn't just symbolic, it was calculated. It pushes the war into a new geography, the Red Sea, and it didn't go unanswered. Days later, the Sudanese army, which Turkey had quietly rearmed, launched retaliatory drone strikes deep into RSF territory. This isn't just a local war anymore. It's a full-blown proxy conflict that pulls in foreign powers far and wide, most notably the UAE and Turkey. The two have stood on opposite ends in many conflicts throughout the periphery. But in Sudan, things have gotten lethal for Emirati and Turkish agents on the ground. Each side is deeply entrenched, and each is chasing stakes far bigger than the country itself. Port Sudan was the last domino, and it just fell. While drones reshape battlefields in Sudan, AI is quietly transforming battlefields of a different kind, our jobs and economies. Most companies are already using AI. Microsoft, Amazon, and Google have laid off thousands because of it, and 40% of people worry AI might take their jobs this year. That sounds scary, but here's the twist. Companies are also hiring. They're looking for people who understand AI, who can use it and build with it. So, if you want to stay ahead, learn AI. And that's where today's sponsor, Outskill, comes in. I highly recommend their 2-day AI training. In just 16 hours, you'll go from beginner to pro. It's worth $895, but I've partnered with Outskill to give 1,000 free seats to CaspianReport viewers. Outskill is the world's first AI-focused education platform. It's backed by top AI investors and founders. And their 2-day program offers 16 hours of live AI training, and it's free for CaspianReport viewers. Click the link in the description to claim your seat before it's gone. In this training, you'll learn practical, useful AI skills from using 20+ AI tools and mastering prompts to analyzing data without code, using AI in Excel, and building neat presentations. You'll also create AI agents, make stunning visuals, and automate tasks to save time. This program is for everyone. Whether you're in tech, sales, marketing, HR, operations, or running your own business. Over 4 million people from more than 120 countries have joined so far, and slots are filling up fast. Click the link in the description to book yours now. You can also join their WhatsApp group for additional updates. The intro call and first session start Friday at 10 a.m. EST. Don't miss it. When war first broke out in April 2023, it followed a familiar script. Whoever held the capital got to call themselves the government. Two factions locked horns, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces. The latter being a paramilitary group comprised of Janjaweed militias that carried out devastating campaigns in Darfur under former President al-Bashir. However, after the 2019 coup that ousted al-Bashir, RSF leader Hemedti became the most powerful person in Sudan. Hemedti saw an opportunity to move up in the world, but when he reached for the throne, he found a battlefield instead. The civil war that ensued was brutal. The Sudanese armed forces held the skies and formal command, but the swift advance of the RSF caught them by surprise. RSF fighters used urban warfare and street-level tactics to overrun Khartoum. Within weeks, the capital was no longer governable. This single event didn't just break the country, it rearranged it. Port Sudan became the de facto capital, while the west of the country fell into ethnic massacres. What territory remained in between became a patchwork for warlords, foreign contractors, and shifting supply lines. Since the fall of Khartoum, over 150,000 people have been killed and more than 12 million displaced, with many fleeing to Egypt, South Sudan, and Chad. Today, it's no longer a civil war in the traditional sense. There are no precise fronts, only rival zones of influence and long-distance strikes. The Rapid Support Forces control most of Western Sudan, including Darfur and the borders with Libya, Chad, and the Central African Republic. That's no coincidence. The RSF has built its empire on smuggling routes, gold mines, and foreign backers. In practice, the RSF is a state within a state. It has its own logistics, airstrips, and chain of command. The Sudanese army, meanwhile, has consolidated in the east. It still commands the remnants of the bureaucracy, the air force, and the formal economy. But it's stretched thin and forced to defend key assets across vast territory. It has the legitimacy, but not always the initiative. The RSF, with fewer constraints and deeper funding, can strike where and when it chooses. That imbalance has shaped the strategy of the war. Rather than chasing territory, the RSF focused on pressure. It weaponized starvation, cut off aid routes, and captured strategic towns. The goal was to exhaust the federal army's resources. It didn't need to win battles or territory, it just needed to make governing impossible. However, that strategy had limits. The RSF lacked long-range capabilities. It couldn't strike targets far from the front, not without help. And that's where drones come in. By late 2023, local observers began recovering fragments of loitering drones. They were sleek, quiet, and unmistakably foreign. These weren't commercial quadcopters. They were fixed-wing loitering drones, designed to circle overhead and dive into targets. Wreckage pointed to the Chinese-made guided bombs and drones previously exported to the UAE. An investigation by Amnesty International found that despite a UN arms embargo on Darfur, Chinese weapons still got in. The UAE buys them legally, then moves them through Somaliland and Chad into RSF-held Darfur. Of course, the UAE denies involvement, but the consistent flight paths and overland convoys tell a different story. The pattern has repeated too many times to ignore. Either way, the RSF now has a drone fleet capable of hitting targets hundreds of kilometers away. In response, the Sudanese army reached out to new allies. In early 2024, Turkey entered the equation. Turkish defense firm Baykar, renowned for its Bayraktar drones, signed off on a $120 million drone package to the Sudanese armed forces. Cargo logs, satellite imagery, and leaked customs data confirmed the deliveries. Within weeks, the Turkish drones were spotted over RSF-controlled airspace. In effect, both the Sudanese army and the RSF now operate drone programs entirely reliant on foreign suppliers, and that dependency is reshaping how the war is fought. The RSF no longer needs to advance to cause damage. It can hit distant targets without risking ground troops. Case in point, this war isn't fought in trenches. It's fought over infrastructure such as roads, airstrips, fuel depots, and drone factories. And it's being outsourced, one arms deal at a time. Officially, no foreign power has joined the war in Sudan. And yet, foreign powers are everywhere. The money, the logistics, the weapons, even the strategy, none of it is Sudanese anymore. The country has become the staging ground for a regional Cold War, drawing in many other powers. Egypt backs the Sudanese armed forces to block Ethiopia from gaining more leverage in the south. Russian and Wagner-affiliated operatives are stationed in the Central African Republic and have reportedly assisted the RSF with logistics. Iran, though not openly involved, has re-engaged with Sudan diplomatically for the first time in years. Even Israel has a stake. Instability by the Red Sea threatens its southern flank. So, what happens in Sudan has repercussions far beyond its borders. It could disrupt everything from trade to counter-insurgency operations. Through all this mayhem, Sudanese territory has steadily been carved up into air routes, supply chains, and strategic corridors. Very little of it is actually controlled by the Sudanese themselves. At the center of this web is the UAE, officially neutral, unofficially pivotal. For the UAE, Sudan is part of a broader campaign to dominate the Red Sea. Abu Dhabi has invested heavily in port infrastructure across East Africa, from Berbera in Somaliland to Assab in Eritrea to Yemen's Socotra Island. The UAE is all over the place. Port Sudan would complete the chain and turn the Red Sea into an Emirati corridor, which would then give it considerable leverage over one of the world's most strategic maritime routes. But there is more at stake than trade. By joining forces with the RSF, Abu Dhabi secures access to gold mines, rare earth minerals, and smuggling routes that stretch into Libya and beyond. The RSF protects Emirati mining deals, and in return, it receives equipment, funding, and weapons. It's a win-win. Turkey, meanwhile, is playing the long game. In 2017, the Turkish government signed a 99-year lease to rehabilitate the old Ottoman port of Suakin just south of Port Sudan. This would have given the Turks a strategic foothold on the Red Sea. However, that plan froze after Sudan's political shakeup, even though the ambition remains. Turkey initially tried to mediate, but once Abu Dhabi began arming the RSF, the balance shifted and talks collapsed. In response, Turkey shifted tactics and backed the legal Sudanese government, positioning itself as a counterweight to Emirati expansionism. Either way, both sides have embedded military advisors, logistics crews, and intelligence officers into the Sudanese army and the RSF, respectively. They've been careful not to step on each other's toes and keep things below the threshold of escalation, until recently, that is. First, on March 26th, the Sudanese army recaptured the capital city of Khartoum. This was the biggest turning point in nearly 2 years of fighting, as it drove RSF contingents into the southwestern corner of the country. By controlling the capital, the Sudanese army also claimed a symbolic victory that boosted its international credibility. Later, on May 3rd, Turkish drones, likely operated by Turkish personnel fighting alongside the Sudanese army, struck a military cargo plane at Nyala Airport. The aircraft was suspected of carrying drones, ammo, and radar systems for the RSF. However, the intel was a little off. In addition to weapons, the plane was carrying foreign mercenaries, including officers and soldiers from the UAE. The Nyala attack neutralized dozens of RSF fighters, but also 4 Emiratis. A response to the attack came a day later. Port Sudan was hit by a wave of precision strikes lasting for well over 3 days. Sudan's only international airport, a military airbase, a power station, the main port for humanitarian aid, and a hotel housing foreign diplomats were all damaged. The attack also targeted military hangars where Turkish-made drones were stored, injuring members of the Turkish support team. The ambush was believed to be planned and executed by the UAE, not the leadership of the RSF. And even though the Emirati leadership condemned the attack, Sudan's government cut ties with Abu Dhabi immediately after. Emirati officials are unsettled by Turkey's involvement in the war, but following the attack on Port Sudan, further escalation is likely. Local analysts believe that the UAE is working to expand its military support to the RSF, which would accelerate the conflict. Meanwhile, the RSF is working towards complete control over the Darfur region. Key to this is the city of Al Fashir, which is the last major city held by the government in the area. If the RSF can take Al Fashir, they will be able to reach further north, and in doing so, strengthen the UAE's supply lines into RSF territory. At the same time, the Sudanese army will try to do the opposite and lift the siege of Al Fashir. It will also want to move the epicenter of the conflict westward towards the border with Chad. Doing so, moving the battlefield closer to its neighbor, increases the likelihood of spillover into Chad, which then prompts that country to reconsider its cooperation with the RSF and the UAE. High-ranking Sudanese military officials have already warned that Chad's airports are legitimate military targets. And so, as the Sudanese army advances westward, military strikes in Chad become all the more likely. This could either pressure Chad to disrupt weapons transfers to the RSF or leave it with no choice but to double down on its support for the RSF. The former is more likely. Many opponents of Chad's President Mohamed Deby have joined the ranks of the Sudanese army, particularly members from the Zagawa community that lives along the Sudan-Chad border. Up to 3,000 Zagawa fighters have joined the Sudanese army, and they hold a grudge against the Janjaweed militias within the RSF, which they fought against in the 2000s. The Sudanese army could encourage the Zagawa fighters to launch attacks into Chad to disrupt RSF supply lines. So, Chad may eventually distance itself to avoid violent spillover into its territory. Even so, this wouldn't fully prevent the conflict from snowballing. As fighting in Sudan prolongs, bleed over into other countries becomes more likely. There are now growing indications that the UAE is looking to expand its supply lines through the Central African Republic and maybe even South Sudan. In March, for instance, the UAE signed an economic partnership with the Central African Republic. While the details remain unclear, the deal may involve using local airports to support the RSF. All things considered, proxy wars are appealing for many foreign powers. They offer influence without occupation, leverage without liability. But in Sudan, Turkey and the UAE have stopped pretending. Their proxies and allies are now targeting each other's officers and assets. What comes next isn't managed escalation, it's a collision. Because the more you try to control a war from afar, the closer it pulls you in. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of what we do, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and mayhaps share the video. In any case, thank you for your time, and Sahol.